St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to another Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Every time we start one of these luncheons and we look out the window, it's always like a picture. Did we paint this on the inside of the glass, or is that actually gorgeous, beautiful, sunny San Francisco Bay? It's fun to be meeting live again after 3 years of Zoom. I don't want to look at another monitor. I want to basically have people smiling in person, and that's what we're doing with the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. So all of us who are sailors and those of us who are newfound crossers over to the dark side, since we bought my sweetheart Christine and I got a powerboat scratch the other day, and we said yes, and we got ourselves a powerboat. We look at the water with different eyes than people who are landlocked, and that is where our speaker today came from. Born in the Central Valley, he as a little boy between Highway 5 and Highway 99 didn't ever see the ocean until he was about 5 years old, when his family would take him to Morro Bay, and all of a sudden he would see this immense, giant, big, powerful thing called the ocean, and it made an indelible impression on him. And as he grew up and went to school and got the classic liberal arts education, he went on to study law and get a JD at Loyola. And then he went and got a master's in international relations, which he applied to the law of the sea. And after a career, including a stint as a lawyer in San Francisco with our one-time one-time Commodore, George Sayer. Who remembers George Sayer? George Sayer was a buddy of all of ours. And I even have a picture of George Sayer and I and Mayor Dianne Feinstein on my phone from when we christened the first America's Cup boat from San Francisco, right out here in front of our hoist. At any rate, he then went on to work for the NRDC, which has got lots of environmental cred. If you pay attention to all the different environmental organizations on the planet, and they are proliferating like flowers, the NRDC ranks very well in terms of its efficiency. He came to my attention when I realized, holy moly, with all these startups in the environmental space, with money pouring into environmental remediation, etc., let's find somebody who's incredibly efficient at it. And so, 20 years ago, our speaker became the first president of the Ocean Foundation, and with $200,000 of seed money, and those of us who've done startups know that that is a pittance. That's not seed money in today's standards. He has since raised $120 million, which he's put to work saving our oceans. Welcome up, Mark Spalding. Mark, president of the Ocean Foundation.
Thank you all very much for having me here, and Ron and Christine for hosting the reception last night. That was really, really nice. And it is great to be back here. George Sayer and I used to sneak away from the law firm and come sail on Friday afternoons once in a while when we could pull it off. So it's kind of neat to be back here after so long.
Has the statute of limitations run on that confession?
Yes. So what I'm going to quickly do is run through a handful of slides, tell you a little bit about my organization, tell you a little bit about climate change and threats and risks, but I really want to quickly get to talking about the opportunities and solutions that we're working on and that all of us can work on together. The Ocean Foundation is set up to look and act like a community foundation. We have many, many individual donors, corporate donors, government donors, and we do their philanthropy for them, with them, as advisors. We do not have a family or corporate endowment behind us. We have to raise all of the money we give away every year. And so it's a ongoing sort of practice for us. Our mission is to reverse the destruction of the ocean. So we just took on something small and easy to tackle. This slide is actually slightly out of date. This is from a year ago. I am now waiting for our audited financial results for the end of the fiscal year on July 31st, but I happen to know that the number is actually over 120 million now that we have raised and given away in our 21 years of existence. It's gone into these different categories, helping with species, helping with habitats, expanding ocean literacy, and then building the capacity of other groups to succeed in conservation. We work in over 40 different countries on 6 different continents, and when I say that, most of the time it means that we are funding others or training others, providing them with the information, the technical resources, or the money they need to succeed in their country, not us sending people to parachute in and do the work in those countries. So I'm going to pick the ocean climate nexus, the issue of climate change, as a context for some of our work and some of what is concerning, right? Most of our planet, as you know, is water. Most of us, live near the ocean, and 1 in 7 people depend on the ocean for their daily protein. But the climate is changing. The temperature is changing. The wind and rainfall patterns are changing. And all of this is because of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, we all hear all of this all the time. But let's ask ourselves what we really mean by that, right? Sea level rise, increased storms, and all of those sort of things. What it really means is widespread hunger and extreme droughts, or more wildfires, which we've seen here in California, right? We have to translate the warming climate, changing climate, to what the effects are to know what we're dealing with in terms of our risks. Now, we who work in the area of climate change have been thinking about, okay, as the ocean rises and gets warmer and has less oxygen in it, what's it going to do to us? We've also had some conversations about what we are doing to the ocean to change it and change where things are happening in the ocean. But recently we've also begun a conversation about how the ocean is our most important ally for absorbing heat, absorbing carbon, and thus is the best thing we can do to deal with climate change is to protect the ocean. So one of the things that the ocean does is regulate our temperatures, our climate, our weather patterns. It holds 50% of the carbon we've emitted since the Industrial Revolution. It is, does all these things. This diagram shows you the global transfer of heat in the ocean and all the different major currents and systems for moving heat. Part of our problem is, as we melt glaciers and change water flows into the ocean, those patterns are breaking down. And this is going to change where water temperatures are warmer, cooler, where storms move, where rain patterns move, etc. So we all sail. This is going to affect us. Ron and I were talking over lunch about, cross-Pacific racing and the scale of waves and, southern hemisphere weather events that caused a cat to be flipped over. Our predictability of those storms is diminishing. Even with technology monitoring what's going on, a lot of that is based on historical records and historical experience. We're entering new territory now where some of that historical record is no longer going to help us in predicting storms. How does that make you feel when you're 6,000 miles offshore in a racing vessel? It also is going to affect places like this marina, right? If you have sea level rise or storm surges or anything else like that, your infrastructure is going to be affected, and that's worldwide. It's not even worldwide. Believe it or not, because the ocean is such a dynamic system, sea level rise is greater in some places than in others, and San Francisco Bay is actually very fortunate because water can expand here into the Back Bay and other places. So this is such a natural, safe place. It's going to remain that to a great extent. But if we, talk about the specifics, warming is one of the things we hear over and over again about climate change, and it's this, absorption of the warmth that we're trapping in the atmosphere. But what does this do? It changes metabolism of fish. It therefore changes their growth rates of sea animals, reproduction, migratory patterns, and susceptibility to disease and toxins. So all of this could disrupt food chains, right? So this is why we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to ourselves in regard to the change in the ocean? Warming, then sea level rise. Sea level rise is caused by warming. It's also caused by melting glaciers and the expansion of warmer water. And so we're expecting to see a full foot of sea level rise by 2050, and if you just look out the window and imagine that water is a foot higher than it is right now, that's a noticeable difference in a very short period of time. But all of that can lead to flooding, having ships and wharfs come in greater contact, decreased clearances under bridges, dislodged containers, storm damage, water and sewer systems getting flooded out and putting water into the bay, all of this sort of stuff that is concerning. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere also gets into the ocean, and the ocean absorbs a lot of it, and in fact is our biggest carbon sink, but it doesn't absorb all of it. And so that dissolved carbon dioxide in the water makes it more acidic, right? The ocean is not becoming acid, but it's becoming more acidic. And this is a problem for shellfish, lobster, anything that has an exoskeleton that could be, requires that carbon to build that structure, coral reefs, all of those things are in danger from ocean acidification. And this is they call it the evil twin of climate change, because it's from the same source, but this is a chemistry change in the ocean versus a physics change that the heat in the atmosphere is causing. And so we're having to deal with this from a completely separate perspective so that we understand what we're working on. But if we think about how ocean acidification could affect the food chain again, this is a whole lot of commercial fishing, aquaculture, other systems that are dependent on the healthy pH, healthy balance of the water, and if we start losing that, it's going to affect our food security and all over the world. So if that's a quick overview of the threats and some of the specific items of sea level rise, warming, ocean acidification, and I'm leaving out for the moment deoxygenation, right? The loss of oxygen in the ocean, which is yet another problem. We at the Ocean Foundation have a lot of donor-advised funds, committee-advised funds, where we make grants at the request of those donors. We also do something called fiscal sponsorship, where we have 52 fiscally sponsored projects, and they raise their own money and implement their own projects, and we take care of the back office for them. So in both of those categories, we're taking care of other people's money. But we do have 4 initiatives of our own. Blue Resilience, Community Education, Ocean Science Equity, and Plastics. The Blue Resilience one is all about addressing climate change. This group team on our staff plants seagrass, plants mangroves, plants restoration of estuaries, make sure those that are still in good condition are protected, has spent time and energy figuring out how you measure how much carbon any of those plant systems take up and store and for how long. So it's a very critical player in thinking about this. And we have the largest mangrove restoration in the United States ongoing right now in Puerto Rico. Community education, you can't get people to fight something that they don't understand, and so this is our team that works on this. Ocean science equity. If you think about it, all of you have heard of Scripps Oceanography in San Diego or Woods Hole on the East Coast. How many of you have heard about the oceanography schools in Ghana or even China, right? How do we figure out how to bring to bear all of those scientists from all of those places around the world and get more information about our ocean? This is what this particular team does. We also have a plastics initiative that is working on the chemistry of plastic and thinking about how to change the polymer mixtures, reduce harmful additives to make plastic more recyclable. But part of what we want to do is figure out how do we, reduce all of those risks that I was talking about and figure out how to safeguard infrastructure and the communities that are behind it. And one of the things that we've begun doing is thinking about the investment world. We have been the ocean advisors for Rockefeller Asset Management for 11 years, so more than half of the length of time that the Ocean Foundation has been around, and we advise 3 different investment portfolios. We have a 4th one that will come online in December, and at that time we will have about $1 billion in assets under management in those 4 investment funds. My job in that place is to think about the threats to the ocean, think about the opportunities to protect the ocean, and how we can help direct capital and ask companies what they can do in this regard. So I start with a list like this one where, okay, what is at risk? Which companies are in the seafood sector, in the coastal tourism sector, ocean transport sector, who we should and could talk to about what are you doing to anticipate that risk? What are you doing to change your business practices? But on the flip side, we can also say, what new opportunities do we see for investment? What new things are out there with regard to responses to climate change, addressing climate change, or things like carbon capture, things like electric vehicles, renewable energy, kelp production? But also, who's building new kinds of coastal infrastructure, right? Instead of just wrap rock, are there other things that can be done to protect this club from storm surge that are more natural? And who's designing that? Who's advancing that? And so we're figuring out how to refocus businesses, investors into restoring abundance and figuring out how they're anticipating protecting their businesses from climate change or doing something to reduce their carbon footprint or their impact. And so we sit there and do a lot of research on these companies and what their opportunities are, advising the investment advisors at Rockefeller, partnering with UBS Bank, UniCredit Bank, Crane Shares in China and others, to think about which companies to invest in. And then, in some cases, we're looking for companies who have a product or service that is actively good for the ocean. In others, we are looking for companies that are doing harm. And we're buying stock in those companies, and then we're going and talking to the senior management of those companies and saying, we want you to change. We want you to change your practice, your behavior, your product, your packaging, your services to become more benign for the ocean. And the great thing is, it's working. You all have probably seen ships come in and out of here that say NYK lines on them. Japanese shipping firm, I think the 3rd or 4th largest in the world. We went into them and said, okay, here's 5 newspaper articles about the harm that's being done from the end of life of your ships when they're recycled on the beaches in India, and the young children who are killed or maimed taking those ships apart, and the pollution from those ship-breaking operations on the beach, the near shore, and the Indian Ocean. We want you to change. We want you to adopt the best practices for end of life. And, after a year's worth of discussion and explaining and talking through the bottom line of all of this, they agreed to do it. Not only did they agree to do it, but they agreed to go with the highest standards, which are the European standards, rather than the Hong Kong Treaty, which is the global standard. They also convinced the government of Japan to invest in those shipyards in India to bring them up to the European standards. So it's a two-prong effort. Those are the kind of conversations that we hope to have over and again with companies in the ocean sector to change something. Well, what happens when you do that? They reduce their risk of being sued for pollution, reduce their risk of being sued for injury to the people working there. They don't get written up in the newspaper anymore for the harm they're causing, so there's a public relations benefit. And all of that combined raised their shareholder price. And so we're producing a value for the shareholders, not just for the ocean. So it's an exciting space for somebody like me to be in. So our job now is to think about how we can engage these companies, engage sailors, engage others in participating in the research about increasing our knowledge of the ocean, thinking about how we share data, how we make sure that those universities in Ghana and other places around the world are sharing their data and they're getting published and getting access to what's going on. And part of this is because there's no way to protect the ocean without solving the climate change problem. And there's absolutely no way to solve the climate change problem without protecting the ocean. That is how integrally connected they are. And we believe that restoring the ocean and its abundance and its ability to function will protect the economy as well as the environment and society from the disruptions. So think about the ocean as this place where we like to sail and we like to enjoy, but think about it also as producing, a third or more of the oxygen we breathe every day, taking up some of the carbon we've emitted, storing it, regulating our weather, and providing a food source. And if we think about all of those benefits it provides, restoring its abundance is got no downsides. Even those folks who, for whatever political reason, don't want to work on climate change, let's restore the ocean just because. And part of our job as the Ocean Foundation is to move all of us in that direction. And that's one of the reasons that, I'm here today at your invitation, is to talk to more people and learn about more people I can talk to and spread this conversation beyond here and go from that. So let me stop there and answer any questions, and Ron and I will come and sit over here and have a conversation, because that's the more fun part anyway.
Yes, perfect, wonderful. So I mentioned during your introduction that after researching multiple environmental organizations over literally the decades we've been doing this show, I thought you guys had an incredibly good, seemed to me, ROI of how you're putting money to work. So tell me, first of all, how big is your paid staff and how many volunteers do you have actively working for the Ocean Foundation?
So we have about 20 core staff. Because we also do what's called fiscal sponsorship and therefore provide payroll services, we probably have another 10 people that would show up as full-time employees but are not part of our core staff. We don't have a real volunteer base the way, say, a Surfrider Foundation that does beach cleanups does, because that's not the kind of work we're doing. Mm-hmm. But we probably at any given year have 50 to 100 volunteers.
Have you measured, or can you guess about volunteer hours, annual volunteer hours?
Probably not. I mean, that
50 hours per person per year?
Yeah, something
okay.
like that.
So now, If you're to measure the ROI of a particular investment you make in service of the environment, how would you measure it?
So, first of all, I ask myself, are we making a real difference? And, the real opportunity there is that sometimes, $500 to a poor community can provide a huge return on investment, and $1 million to a university doesn't. And so the amount of money is less relevant to what we're, putting the money into. And so ask yourself whether you're moving the needle on conservation, moving the needle on restoring the ocean and improving its abundance.
If you were to rank those grants you've given out in terms of having the best effect per dollar spent, tell us about grants that you like a lot, you thought were favorable, efficient.
It's efficient. All of our grants are efficient, I hope. We have very high ratings on Charity Navigator and GuideStar who measure these things better than I claim to. But I think the things that I'm most proud of is I've worked in the town of Loreto in Baja California Sur for 36 years, so even longer than the Ocean Foundation has been around. And we've probably spent $1 million in this small town, $1.5 million. And through that, we have created an ethos by the community to support their marine park that is in front of the town, and gotten the community to work on cleanups, worked with them during the pandemic on even healthcare issues. And we recently convinced the Mexican federal government to transfer land from their tourism development authority to their park service behind, on the shore behind the National Marine Park. And we asked them for 5,000 acres, and they gave us 22,000 acres. That's an amazing return on investment of years and money in a small place to try and make a difference.
So river spills, what are the most offensive rivers? Where are they?
So a study was done a few years ago by McKinsey and Company that basically placed most of the pollution from rivers in Southeast Asia. Most of us, including McKinsey, now believe that pollution didn't come from there. It came from here. For years and years, we have been exporting our plastics to China and Southeast Asia to be recycled, and some of it was recycled, but a lot of it couldn't be managed or couldn't be recycled because of contamination or other problems, and it ended up going into the environment, and a lot of it came through those rivers into the ocean.
Do you have any metrics on how much flows from rivers into the oceans annually?
So the statistic that Jenna Jambeck, who's the expert on this, uses is the equivalent of one dump truck per minute. So it's a tremendous quantity, and this is one of the things we discussed briefly last night was the petrochemical companies who want to blame individuals for poor recycling behavior or cities for poor management of their waste in their city, are missing the scale of the problem, and they're trying to transfer blame rather than recognizing that this is a product that doesn't break down in the environment and causes tremendous harm. And this scale we're talking about means we just can't deal with it unless we stop it. Less than 6% of all of the plastic you touch ever gets recycled.
Amazing. Staying on the rivers, spilling pollution in the ocean, talk about the best techniques for catching, netting, or grabbing that pollution, given that it's a big problem, given there are fish coming down the rivers as well.
Yeah. So many of you have probably heard of an organization called Ocean Cleanup, a fellow by the name of Boyan Slat from Europe, who had the idea of taking nets and pulling them between ships. He came out of the bay here a couple of times. Mm-hmm. The problem with that was, many years ago we outlawed drift nets for fishing because of their indiscriminate catch. Well, essentially, he was proposing to use drift nets to go drag through the ocean and pick up everything in their pathway, hopefully mostly plastic, but their own environmental impact assessment showed how many marine mammals, sea turtles, fish, etc., would be killed in the process. He and all of us in the community have learned since then that it looks like a much better way to deal with this problem is to prevent the stuff from getting into the ocean in the first place by putting some of those barriers in rivers and stopping the plastic while it's still large, still is in the not broken down yet, and you can capture it with these nets and quickly pull it out. And we're seeing a lot of advances right now in that. But again, that's, after it's too late, right? We need to prevent the plastic from being made and used in single-use applications. We need to stop letting it even get to that river in the first place.
Catching it at the mouth of the river is so much more efficient than finding it where it's dissipated around the oceans.
Correct.
Which brings us to the next question of microplastics. Everybody knows that sand is the result of waves hitting rocks for, millennia and breaking down into sand. And as we've been learning, pieces of plastic that fall in the ocean that undergo the same kind of physical process turn into smaller and smaller bits of sand, smaller and smaller bits of plastic, microplastics as we know them. And they're now in the food system because they're eaten by fish and go into the fish that we buy and eat. And we've heard from speakers before this that the microplastics now are beginning to coat parts of the bottom of the ocean. Now talk about an expensive place to do a cleanup. Mm-hmm. The Mariana Trench at 35,000 feet is a ridiculously expensive place to clean up. And yet, when you cover the bottom of the ocean, you affect the food column above that patch. Talk to us a little bit about the danger of microplastics coating the bottom of the ocean.
So the microplastics are in the water column on the bottom of the ocean. They're even in the surf spray. They're being lifted up out of the ocean in transevaporation and coming back down in the rain in the Alps and other places, right? This is not just the bottom of the seafloor that we're worried about. And they're so small, microscopic, that you can't pick them up. Literally can't pick them up. And if I had a mesh small enough to catch them, I would kill everything in the ocean trying to collect them. So this is why we need to figure out how to stop this from getting there in the first place rather than even talking about cleaning it up. Once it's in that size and that space, it's impossible.
So we've had speakers speak about this issue, and they've been at the other end. You're, I think, wisely saying, no, we have to stop it at the source. Those who say it hasn't been stopped at the source say they can help clean up the Pacific Gyre or the Seven Gyres, as Mary Crowley has identified them, in the world where current systems allow waste plastic and fishing gear to swirl around. What's so remarkable about the videos she's shown is that Coke cans will collect together, and then toothpaste brushes will collect together because they sort by density and size. It's completely preposterous idea, and it's actually happening. So we've seen pictures. A speaker recently who's got about 1,000 volunteers in the northwestern Hawaii archipelago points out that when he sorts things out, he ends up collecting them this way. These are all, shower caps. These are all bottle caps. These are all whatever they are. So talk to us a little bit about this even though we want to catch it before it gets to the ocean. Talk about what happens when these plastics and wastes get into the ocean, how they get collected.
So, first of all, I want to make clear that I'm not opposed to cleaning up the ocean or cleaning up the beaches. I was on the board of directors of Surfrider Foundation and did all the beach cleanups and work. It is incredibly valuable to do. It's incredibly inspiring for volunteers to work on. All of you who have traveled and picked up a big clump of stuff out of the ocean, thank you. I think that's absolutely critical to do. And if it's big enough that it hasn't broken down yet, you've gotten it out in time. So I think it's worth doing. But yeah, the part of what we're seeing is the pattern of the gyres collecting this material, which does give us some places where we can clean it up. The north side of the Northwest Hawaiian Islands is just covered with plastic. We could go out there and clean them, spick and span and go back 3 months later and do it again, and 3 months later and do it again, because they're literally a barrier that's sitting there with its arm out to collect all of this stuff. And I the expense and the carbon, footprint of steaming out there, collecting it all, putting it on a ship, bringing it back, doing something with it, burning it, compressing it, maybe recycling it, is a tremendous expense, a tremendous carbon footprint. And there have been folks who are experimenting with autonomous electric vehicles to do this. Maybe we'll get there. And maybe they'll be able to go out at a price point that actually makes sense. As somebody who's a grant maker, I get these proposals all the time, and most of them don't, pencil out.
Okay, back to, and I'm going to keep asking questions, but if anybody in the audience has a question, hold your hand up. Arjun will bring the mic to you, and we'd like you to face that way so the light can be on your face and you can ask your question. I have a global question. Who's best at measuring climate change?
Wow. So the Europeans have invested about 6 times as much money in climate change measurements than China, which has invested much more than the United States. So I'd say the European Union data and expertise on monitoring climate change is probably the best in the world, and we're probably third in quality.
Yes, Staff Commodore Bruce Monroe, always with a
Okay.
thoughtful question.
So, we all use plastic every day, and it's amazing. So, should I recycle my plastic or put it in landfill?
Great question, and something that I wrestle with every day. So first of all, let's remember that some plastics that you touch every day, like the light switch in your bedroom, is going to be there for 30 to 50 years. That's not really what we're worried about, right? We're worried about the stuff that is disposed of as soon as you have used it: a plastic straw, a plastic lid on coffee, etc. If it is clear, no colors, and rather flexible, put it in recycling. I have relative confidence it's going to get recycled. If it has color and is really, really stiff, it's probably not going to get recycled. The darker the color, the less likely it is going to be recycled. These are very big generalizations, I realize, but they seem to be holding true. PET plastic, which is the clear plastic that plastic water bottles are made out of, that's the highest percentage of recycling there is. The white plastic caps that come on them, not so much. Films, plastic wrap, the plastic that your clothes come back from the dry cleaner in, high level of recycling, but it gums up the recycling facilities. The plastic containers that say yogurt comes in, they're kind of flexible, kind of not a dark color. Those are, probably third in the quality of recyclability. So if you can buy things in glass or aluminum or refill containers, do that to avoid the single use. If you can turn down the straw at the bar, do that. If you can, carry around a metal water bottle, do that. Avoid those as much as you can so that you don't have to make the decision about whether to put it in recycling or not.
Kathy Trafton, Vice Chairman of our committee, has a question. Kathy.
Of course. Mark, thank you so much for being here. I have a couple of questions. First of all, on the personal level, as we're talking about personal responsibility and recycling, do you eat fish? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what is the calculation for people about eating fish or not? And then an entirely different question would be to discuss Japan and their nuclear reactor waste, Fukushima. They're going to be releasing some waste into the ocean. Help.
So one of the heroes in ocean conservation is a woman by the name of Sylvia Earle, and she says, "I do not eat my friends." And so...
Wait, Sylvia Earle.
Yep.
Right off, we got to just applaud Sylvia Earle.
Exactly. I've adopted that, and I say I do not eat my clients. Now, having said that and going to the more general question, seafood is the lowest carbon footprint protein you can choose almost always. Yes. Meat protein. I will modify my statement. So beef is the highest, pork is second, turkey's third, chicken's fourth. Then we get into seafood, and the gap between chicken and seafood is quite substantial. So if you are choosing an entree at a restaurant or choosing something at the market, fish is a wise environmental choice. If it is locally caught, even better, because then there's less carbon footprint of moving it around, etc. And part of our problem has been for years is we've been catching halibut in Alaska, shipping it to China to be deboned and filleted, and then shipping it back. So even something that could be local isn't entirely. So think about, go to Whole Foods and look at the counter and talk to the person behind the counter about where the fish came from is part of your good choice. Your third question about Fukushima. So I sit on the Ocean Studies Board of the United States National Academy of Sciences, and we had our annual meeting on Monday and Tuesday last week in Washington, D.C., and we were briefed on the Fukushima water release that recently took place. And the simplistic argument is that amount of contaminated water is not harmful. They even tested it by putting measurements in a tank with fish with that water and no other water, and said, look, the fish are fine. I wouldn't eat them, but I wouldn't have eaten it anyway. Yes. The problem is that contaminated water doesn't dilute really. Certainly does not lose its character, right? It dilutes, but it doesn't lose its character as contaminated water. They have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tanks full of contaminated water and are continuing to accumulate more because natural water flows are going into the plant and becoming contaminated by the core of the power plant, and they need that in order to keep it cool. So they're accumulating more, they're running out of space, they want to start dumping this water so that they can reuse the tanks. The half-life of the type of material is thousands of years, which means the more they dump, the more is going to accumulate. So the basic results of the briefing was really, really depressing because there's no other solution than dumping that anybody's really come across yet. There's no treatment for the water that actually works. There's no place else to send it to be stored. There's nothing other than water that will keep the core, keep cooling the core. So what do we do? And I think it's going to be a really tough conversation to figure out, how this goes forward. But it is a real risk to the Pacific Ocean, and because of the way the gyres work and everything else, that contamination is going to cross the Pacific and affect, our food resources and everything else.
We have another question from our audience.
Fred Mites. This is an easy question compared to that one.
Thank you.
Two questions, actually. Do Europe, China, and the U.S. share their data back and forth? Are they collaborating as far as science is concerned?
Fundamentally, yes. We believe that most scientists are willing to collaborate, and different universities are willing to collaborate. Zhengdao, which is the leading oceanographic school in China, regularly collaborates with Scripps Oceanography, and the Europeans and the U.S. certainly do. There is a little bit of holding back data by individual scientists because they don't want somebody else using their data to publish. And I think we're beginning to break some of that down with new rules regarding permissions to, review documents using your data. So I think we're getting better. Technology is allowing us to do a better job of sharing data and checking whether data has been used properly or not. And I think that's going to help.
Okay, great, thank you. And second one, excuse me, I heard one of the UN executives talk not too long ago about the UN Decade of Ocean Science. Major effort to try to reverse the damage in the oceans by 2030. But he was saying that unless they fundamentally understand the ocean processes a lot better than they do now, they're going to fall short of their goals. And the only way they can understand the processes better is to collect a lot more data.
Yep.
And the challenge was, how do we get maritime industry, involved in collecting more data? So I was wondering if you had any ideas on how that might happen.
So the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is a remarkable effort to organize everybody to go forward together and collect more data. So the slogan is, the science we need for the ocean we want. So looking forward to the future. And so I really want to, support this in any way we possibly can. Our challenge is, it came from the UN General Assembly with no money. The Europeans and the United States have put in a little money. No one much else has. Everybody's like, okay, let's do this, but where's the money? And so the second part of your question, I think, is actually pretty great, which is, how do we get industry involved? Well, again, from the stock ownership we have, we've begun stepping our foot in there. And so we asked Maersk, the largest world shipping line, who's been collecting ocean data for years, temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, currents, handful of other parameters, if they would share it with the world. And again, after a few months of discussion about whether it was going to matter to their business or not, they said yes. So it is now publicly available. Now, the next step is to convince others to do the same who are measuring things, and then also asking yacht owners to add sensors to their vessels as they wander around the planet and share that data. There are a few super yacht owners who are doing that already. I think there's a real opportunity there as well.
Kathy, we have a question online.
Yes, we do. So this comes in asking, I wonder how Mark answers people who do not believe their individual actions matter, since plastic is literally ubiquitous. Thank you for all you do. We must land always on the side of hope.
We must. I'm going to go back to what I said a moment ago, and all of us should not feel personally guilty that a product has been produced for a purpose that was to be disposed of it, right? This is what it was marketed to do. This is what it was intended to do. The drink manufacturers, whoever out there, said we want something that's unbreakable. We want something that is going to reduce food waste. We want something that is going to be lightweight for transport. And we got all of those things, right? We are getting benefits from plastic. Even some single-use plastics, you don't want the syringe at the hospital to be used 3 times, are good. But I think if all of us turn down a straw every time we go to have a drink somewhere, it begins to add up. If we make sure that those plastics don't end up in the landfill and are actually going somewhere by, encouraging the companies to take back the things they've made, encouraging cities to properly dispose of them, it ends up making a difference. We had a single restaurant as an experiment stop giving out plastic straws, and it saved them $5,000 a year at 3 cents a straw, or something less than that even. and nobody asked for one. Nobody asked for one. And they were available upon request. They gave almost none out over the course of 12 months. That is, makes a big, big difference, right? And if you think about a large restaurant and how many straws they go through every day, can't we, make them available for those who need them, right? People with disabilities who need a straw should be able to ask for one and should be given one without any question. Can we also replace them with paper or bamboo straws, particularly if we're using less of them, and make this possible? And I think all of that is things we can do as individuals. Earlier in answering the other question, make your choices, right? If you can get San Pellegrino water in a glass bottle instead of a plastic bottle, go for it, right? That is every action counts. Hope counts.
Another question for the audience.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, I was actually going to ask a question regarding the ROI, but then I heard the story about mask and the what do you call the sensors you're putting on. So I thought that would be a very interesting story because I could, from my past, which would connect back to the question that I had. So I was going to just add that. And my son is here, who's 21, and he could hear something about my past as well.
Okay.
I was a professor at Stanford 10, 15 years ago. I was also in the faculty at Harvard.
Get the mic closer.
Sorry, I was a professor at Stanford for many years. Before that, I was in the faculty at Harvard. But I got my start because I grew up in Singapore, which is a big nation, and I ended up going to England, when he was this age, a bit younger, and I didn't understand the snow. I was freezing, but I got this job because I was broke and I needed a job. And I ended up getting a summer internship at something called TED, which is the equivalent of the NIH here, the NSF and so on, TED. So I had to cycle during the winter, 18 miles a day through back and forth to this job. And I thought I was getting paid 80 pounds a week. It was wonderful. So this physicist, I was a theoretical physicist, I ended up working with Stephen Hawking for a while before I switched to biology and so on.
Keep the mic close.
Sorry. So I ended up working with, being a physicist, ended up working later with Stephen Hawking and then quit and became a biologist and other stuff. But anyway, I thought I was doing the world a favor by going to this guy's job, and he was a physicist, and he had there were 8,000 ships in the world at that time, big ships that go across. There are about 50,000 now. I had to memorize all the names because my job with the early computing was to track the information that these ships gave. They had sensors on them, and they would come into port, and they would just pick it up. And once or two, 3, 4 times a year, and we would get, temperature, basic stuff. And I thought he was using it for all this wonderful science. And by the time I finished 8 weeks with him, I was so disillusioned because he was just collecting it, not for the weather, to sell it for insurance purposes to Lloyd. Okay? So
the question is?
So the question is, it relates back to the question, which is your question regarding, when you said that you're working with the Rockefeller Foundation and the assets and all that stuff. The question is, when you go to these companies and you're saying, okay, you sit on the board and you tell them to do this and that, right? Is there a critical way of measuring the ROI so that, I'm not saying maybe you do it or somebody's done it. Has anybody done, because that's the way you want to push them, because it's nice to say in newspaper reports and all those things, right? But if there's a critical measure, like you did with the $5,000 for the straws, right? That's a return, right? I mean, and I see it because I'm also an entrepreneur. I've started 18 companies, a couple are listed and so on.
So the tight question is?
The tight question is there something specific that you've come across that when you go to tell these companies to do this sort of stuff, right? Is there a real measure, bottom line measure that you or others have been able to drag out of the ocean to give it to them?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So I'm going to answer this sort of 3 ways. Number 1, often to convince the company to make a change, we have to show them that it saves them money or at least isn't going to cost them any money because they don't want it to affect their revenues. It's the rare management of a company who are willing to do something because it's the right thing to do. We recently talked to Loblaw grocery stores in Canada about getting rid of plastic bags, and the head of the company said, yeah, let's do that. And his managers were like, well, wait a minute, let's think about the cost. And he's like, I don't give a damn. And, he did it. So as a conservationist, I measure that as a success of return on the investment of my time. The investor side, which is the second piece, we are measuring it. Rockefeller, when I say that, Rockefeller Asset Management is measuring it. Our bank partners, UBS and UniCredit, are measuring it. And they have annual reports that I'm happy to share with anybody regarding that and how they're measuring it. Fundamentally, they're looking, these are all public equities, therefore they're measuring the stock value. They're measuring the expenses, if there are any reduction in expenses. Does emissions reduction, for example, result in lower fuel costs and other expenses? Does converting to electric port facilities and getting rid of diesel cranes reduce repair costs? And all of those individual things can be measured, and you kind of have to get into that granular scale to ask some of the questions regarding which practice you're asking to be changed. But yes, I think it is measurable, and I think, I'm sitting here telling them what to do with regard to the ocean, often without regard to the returns, although I do listen to that carefully, and they're the ones who are responsible for measuring that. But I'm happy to share a couple papers we've published and the annual reports that have been put out on the funds.
A short question from the audience. Eula.
Quick. Are there any paper products that are unfriendly to environment, and why? Thank you.
So the cartons that milk and other things come in are often coated with plastics these days for their labels or for protection from spoilage. The plastic lining will prevent air from getting in. So some of those kinds of things are problematic, where you've contaminated the paper with other petrochemical materials. I think the papers that are bleached, super white, are less friendly than those that are not bleached. So you want to look at the manufacturing process and the life cycle of them. But paper is preferable to plastic, but a cloth bag that you're going to use 6,000 times before it wears out is much better.
So the downstream effect of beef, we've also seen that cows, independent of them providing milk, they have other emissions that are damaging the environment, mostly burps, although everybody jokes about the other kind. So we have had a speaker a while ago, 6 months ago, who introduced a new kind of seaweed that they bred, a new species of seaweed, which when fed to the cows reduces the emissions by cows, which is a serious pollutant, by the way, worldwide, reduce the emissions by like 40%. So talk to us about inventing products that help the environment.
So the new investment fund that we're going to release in December is focused on new inventions, innovations, both sustaining innovations that are improving existing products or disruptive new inventions. Any of those that will reduce emissions, reduce consumption, increase efficiency are things that we've got to be pursuing if we're going to address climate change. The cow example is a great example. I mean, the methane that cows release is a much worse greenhouse gas, much more harmful greenhouse gas than CO2 from our automobiles. And so doing something about that is critical, and I've read about the seaweed additive to their foods that help with that, so that's great.
Another question from the audience.
Melinda Mites.
Hi, Melinda.
Hi there. I have a question for you, and this is innovation. Among many concerns, I have one about seafloor mining. And I know that we want to have electrically driven cars, boats, everything we can get. But is there something with innovation that I've recently heard about sodium, being able to use that in lieu of the cobalt and all the other minerals?
So we have an entire effort working on deep seabed mining right now. We have had one or two of our staff at all of the International Seabed Authority meetings where they're discussing seabed mining and asking questions about the environmental harm from seabed mining. We've also been asking questions about the financial return on investment of deep seabed mining and the lack of business proposition for doing it. And part of that lack of business proposition is the new development of technologies on materials for making batteries. And I think we should be, our national labs are doing this, others are doing this, Europeans are doing this. There's a lot of effort being put into, getting rid of the use, or reducing the use of, getting rid of the use of precious metals in batteries so that we can electrify more things more rapidly at lower cost with less harm from terrestrial or seabed mining.
So this has been a fascinating conversation. We created the pollution that you're talking about, and it'll be humans who solve this problem. We seem to make all of our greatest advances when we're faced with a cliff or an emergency. All of humanity's done this for decades. We want to thank Mark Spalding for, rather than harnessing lots of volunteers who go out and clean the ocean, helping to spur the invention and the investment into technologies and people to solve this problem. Thanks so much, Mark. Welcome, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you. Among the most knowledgeable speakers we've had for the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Thank you. With that, the lunch is adjourned.
All right.
Great.
Thank you all.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.